Imagine you are standing in a grocery store. Your 3-year-old wanted to hold the crackers. You said not yet, because you were almost at the checkout and you needed both hands free. That was it. That was the whole thing. And now your child is on the floor, body rigid, face red, crying the kind of cry that makes strangers look over. You are not a bad parent. You are not even being unreasonable. And yet something in that moment cracked open something enormous in your child, and you have no idea why something so small became something so large. Most parents, standing in that moment, believe one of two things. Either their child is being manipulative, testing limits, pushing buttons on purpose, or they believe something is wrong with their child, some fundamental difficulty that needs to be corrected. Both of those explanations feel logical. Both of them are almost entirely wrong. What the research in developmental psychology actually shows is something far more interesting and, once you understand it, far less frightening. That meltdown has almost nothing to do with crackers. It has everything to do with a system inside your child's brain that is still under construction. A system that, depending on how the adults around them respond over time, will wire itself in ways that either help your child feel safe in the world or teach them that the world is fundamentally unpredictable and threatening. And that wiring process is what researchers call attachment, specifically the anxious variant of it. And most of the parents who accidentally created had absolutely no idea they were doing anything at all. By the end of this, you will understand what anxious attachment actually is, how it forms in the small, unremarkable moments of daily life rather than in dramatic ones, and what you can start noticing differently. Not to fix your child, but to give their developing brain what it is actually asking for. Let's start with the science. Inside your child's brain, there is a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Its job is threat detection. It scans every moment of every day, asking one question: am I safe right now? When the amygdala perceives a threat, and in a young child, a threat can be something as abstract as a change in routine or a parent's tense tone of voice, it fires a distress signal. That signal floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, the same chemicals released in adults during genuine emergencies. To your child's nervous system, being denied the crackers and being chased by a dog are processed through the same initial hardware. Now here is the important part. The amygdala does not have great judgment on its own. In adults, a different brain region, the prefrontal cortex, located just behind your forehead, acts as a kind of supervisor. It receives that distress signal and evaluates it. It says, "This is not actually a lion. We are in a grocery store, we can calm down." But in children under the age of 5 or 6, that prefrontal cortex is not yet capable of doing that job. The neural connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are still being built, literally still growing. Myelination, the process by which neural pathways get coated in a fatty substance that makes them faster and more reliable, is not complete in this region until the mid-20s. This means your toddler is not choosing to be irrational. They are being run almost entirely by their emotional alarm system, with almost no internal ability to override it. The technical term researchers use is that young children have very limited capacity for self-regulation. They cannot talk themselves down. They cannot reason their way out of a feeling. What they can do is borrow your calm, because your regulated nervous system, when present and responsive, actually helps their nervous system settle. This process is called co-regulation, and it is not a parenting philosophy. It is a neurobiological mechanism. When you stay calm in the storm of a meltdown, you are literally lending your child brain resources they do not yet have. Where attachment enters this picture is in how consistently and predictably that co-regulation is available. When a child reliably receives a calm, attuned response to their distress, not perfect, not every single time, but reliably enough, their brain learns something foundational. Distress is temporary, help is coming, the world is manageable. That is the core of what researchers call secure attachment. But when the response to distress is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes absent, sometimes overwhelming, the brain learns something different. It learns to stay on high alert because it cannot predict when help will arrive. That is the beginning of anxious attachment, and it starts being shaped in the first months and years of life, long before your child can talk about any of it. Here is where it gets easy to misread what is happening. The first thing parents commonly get wrong is believing that the emotional intensity of their child is a behavioral problem to be corrected, rather than a communication to be understood. When a child cries every morning at preschool drop-off, the instinct is often to wonder whether you are being too soft, whether you should push them through it more firmly, whether you are somehow making it worse by acknowledging how hard it feels. Some parents harden their response because they genuinely believe that soothing a distressed child rewards the distress and therefore increases it. This makes intuitive sense. It is also, according to decades of attachment research, the opposite of what happens. What the research shows is that distress acknowledged tends to diminish because acknowledgement sends a signal to the amygdala that the threat has been identified and is being handled. Distress dismissed tends to escalate or go underground because the alarm system keeps firing until it gets a response. When you say you're okay and move on quickly, you are not teaching your child that the situation is safe. You are teaching their nervous system that expressing distress does not reliably bring comfort, which causes the system to fire louder and more urgently next time to get a response. This is not manipulation. This is biology. The second common misreading is interpreting clinginess as immaturity or excessive neediness that should be discouraged. A 4-year-old who follows you from room to room, who becomes distressed when you are out of sight for more than a few minutes. Who needs to physically touch you frequently throughout the day? This behavior can feel smothering, and the natural parental response is to encourage independence, to nudge the child toward playing alone, to gradually create distance. This response is completely understandable. It also misses what the behavior is signaling. Clinginess in children is almost always a sign of an attachment system that is uncertain, not a sign of a child who has too much connection. The child who follows you everywhere is not doing so because they are overly bonded to you. They are doing so because their brain has not yet received enough consistent evidence that you will be reliably available when they need you. So they compensate by never letting you far enough away to test that. Creating distance in response to clinginess tends to confirm the fear rather than resolve it. The child who receives consistent, warm availability, who gets their bids for connection answered regularly, is paradoxically the one who can tolerate separation most easily. The third misreading is perhaps the most counterintuitive. Many parents believe that anxious attachment, if it exists in their child, must be the result of something dramatic, a hospitalization, a family crisis, a significant trauma. They do not see anything in their parenting that would cause it. They are loving, present, attentive, and so the anxiety gets attributed to the child's temperament, which is partly true. Temperament does play a role, but also partly a way of taking a complex picture and flattening it into something simpler. Anxious attachment does not primarily emerge from dramatic events. It emerges from the texture of ordinary interactions repeated thousands of times. It comes from the tone of voice that shifts when you are stressed, so your child cannot predict which version of you they will get. It comes from comfort that arrives inconsistently. Warm one afternoon, distracted the next. It comes from emotional responses that feel unpredictable to the child, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because you are a human adult managing your own stress, grief, exhaustion, and worry. The parent who creates anxious attachment is almost always a parent who is doing their genuine best under conditions that make consistency difficult. Understanding this is not about assigning blame, it is about seeing the whole picture clearly. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who first developed attachment theory in the 1950s, proposed something that was radical at the time and is now well supported by neuroscience. Children are born biologically prepared to attach to a caregiver, and the quality of that attachment shapes how they interpret and navigate relationships for the rest of their lives. He called this the internal working model, essentially a mental blueprint for how relationships work, built from thousands of early interactions and carried forward into adulthood. Mary Ainsworth, a developmental psychologist who worked after Bowlby, designed a now famous procedure called the strange situation, in which infants were briefly separated from their caregivers and then reunited, with their responses carefully observed. What she found was that children's responses fell into distinct patterns. Securely attached children were distressed by separation, but calmed relatively quickly when the caregiver returned. Anxiously attached children, the ones she described as anxious ambivalent, were highly distressed during separation, but then, when the caregiver returned, were difficult to comfort. They would reach for the parent and then resist them. They would cry while being held. They seemed caught between wanting the comfort and being unable to receive it. Later research identified what predicted which pattern emerged. It was not the amount of love parents felt. It was something called contingent responsiveness, the degree to which a caregiver's response consistently matched what the child was actually communicating. Contingent means dependent on, so contingent responsiveness means a response that actually tracks the child's signal. When you notice that your baby is overstimulated and you dial back the interaction, that is contingent. When you notice your toddler is getting overwhelmed at a birthday party and you create a quiet moment with them, that is contingent. When you are too busy to notice the signal, or you misread it, or your response is driven more by your own emotional state than by theirs, the contingency breaks down, and repeated breaks in contingency, even without any drama, are what slowly train the brain toward anxious attachment. Research by developmental psychologist Ed Tronick on what he called the still face paradigm showed just how sensitive infants are to this contingency. In his experiments, a caregiver would interact normally with their baby for a few minutes, and the baby would be engaged, smiling, vocalizing. Then the caregiver was asked to go still, to hold a neutral, unresponsive expression for 2 minutes. Within seconds, the babies would start trying to re-engage. They would smile, point, reach, vocalize. When that got no response, they would escalate, reaching more desperately, making more noise. And then, within minutes, many babies would simply collapse into themselves, going quiet, looking away, showing what researchers recognized as an early distress withdrawal response. The striking part is not that the still face caused distress. The striking part is how quickly it did, and how hard the babies worked to restore the connection before giving up. What this tells us about anxious attachment is important. The infant and toddler brain is not just seeking comfort when distressed, it is constantly monitoring the caregiver for signs of availability and responsiveness. When those signs are inconsistent, present sometimes, absent others, warm now, preoccupied later, the monitoring system does not relax. It intensifies, because from an evolutionary standpoint, a caregiver who is sometimes unavailable is more dangerous than one who is consistently unavailable, because at least consistent unavailability can be adapted to. Inconsistency keeps the alarm system on, and a nervous system that stays on too long begins to reorganize itself around the assumption that threat is always nearby and comfort is never guaranteed. This is what researchers mean when they talk about hyperactivation of the attachment system. The child is not being dramatic. They are responding rationally to an environment that has taught them that calm is temporary and danger, or at least disconnection, is never far away. Now let's bring this out of the research and into your living room. Your child is 4 years old. It is a Tuesday morning. Nothing special. They come into the kitchen while you are making coffee and they ask you to watch something. They want to show you how they can hop on one foot. You are half awake and also thinking about an email you need to send, and you say, while looking at your phone. They hop. They look up at you. You are not looking at them. They hop again, more emphatically. You glance up, say good job, and look back down. What your child needed in that moment was not praise. They needed what researchers call attunement, a response that showed their experience was seen and shared. The bid they were making was not watch me hop. The bid was, I exist, I matter, be with me. When you missed it, not because you were a bad parent, but because you were a tired human with an email to send, their internal monitoring system registered a small data point. I reached out, and the connection was not there. One Tuesday morning means nothing. But that same dynamic, repeated across months, teaches a nervous system to be less certain about the availability of connection. The child who has accumulated many missed bids does not typically become quieter in their requests. They become louder, more insistent, more emotionally charged, because louder bids have historically been harder to ignore. Your child is 6.5. It is evening. They had a hard day at school. Something happened with a friend, and the feelings are still sitting in their body. They do not have the language to explain it. Instead, they become difficult at dinner. They complain about the food, they pick a fight with a sibling, they knock over their water glass, and when you react with frustration, they burst into tears entirely out of proportion to the spilled water. What is happening inside them is this: the distress from school is still stored as a physical feeling in their body, and they need help processing it, but they do not have the cognitive language to say, "I had a hard day and I need to talk about it." So the feeling looks for an exit. The fight about food, the knocked glass, these are not manipulation. They are a nervous system looking for an opening to release what has been building. The tears that come after your frustrated response are the release. They are not about the water. The response that helps in this situation is not solving the food complaint or addressing the behavior directly. It is curiosity. Something like "you seem like you're carrying something heavy tonight" opens a door the behavior never could. The response that escalates is what most parents do naturally, which is address the surface behavior, talking about why we do not knock glasses over, why we eat what is served, which leaves the underlying distress completely unaddressed and teaches the child that the feelings driving their behavior are not something adults can handle or help with. Your child is 2.5. They are at the park. Another child takes the shovel they were using, and before you can react, your child is already melting down, full body, inconsolable. Another parent nearby says loudly enough to be heard, "He's so sensitive." You feel embarrassed. You scoop your child up quickly. Tell them it's okay. Try to redirect them to a different toy. The speed of the meltdown does not mean there is something wrong with your child's nervous system. It may mean their amygdala is particularly reactive. Some children are simply born with higher neurological sensitivity, and this is actually associated with greater capacity for empathy and creativity later in life, when it is well supported. What the quick redirection does is skip the acknowledgement step entirely. Your child does not need a different toy. They need someone to confirm that what happened felt bad, that the feeling makes sense, and that they are not alone in it. Even at 2.5. The acknowledgement can be simple. Someone took your shovel, and that felt really wrong. That made you so mad. And it does not need to take long, but it needs to happen before the redirect, because skipping it teaches the child that feelings are inconvenient and should be moved past quickly, which is precisely what an anxious nervous system does not need to learn. Your child is 5. Drop-off at kindergarten has been hard every day for 3 weeks. Your child grabs your leg, your coat, your hand. Their cry is not a performance. It is real, physiological distress. You have tried everything. You have been stern. You have been soothing. You have tried leaving quickly. You have tried long goodbyes. Nothing seems to work. You are starting to wonder whether kindergarten itself is wrong for them. Here is what might help to know. The duration and intensity of the goodbye distress is less important than what your child believes will happen when you return. Anxious attachment at drop-off is almost never about the school environment. It is about the child's internal working model, their deeply held belief about whether caregivers are reliably available. The child who struggles most at drop-off is often the child whose experience of parental availability has been inconsistent enough that they have not yet internalized a stable sense that you will come back, that the separation is temporary, that the world remains safe when you are not in it. The intervention that helps most is not changing the drop-off procedure. It is the quality of the reconnection when you arrive, the warmth and attention of the first 5 minutes when you pick them up, and the attunement woven into the thousands of small moments before the drop-off ever happens. So what can you actually do with any of this? Not in a dramatic overhaul way, but in a small Tuesday morning kind of way. The first shift is in where you put your attention during conflict. Most parental attention during a meltdown or a difficult moment goes to the behavior, the knocked glass, the crying, the refusing to eat. Try noticing instead what the behavior might be carrying. Not to excuse it, but to read it. A child who melts down over small things is almost always a child whose nervous system is already full before the small thing happens. The small thing is never really the issue. The second shift is in your response to bids for connection. When your child wants to show you something, their drawing, their hop, a beetle they found on the sidewalk, the research suggests that whether you respond matters more than how you respond. A simple, genuine moment of shared attention, actually looking, actually engaging for 15 seconds, does more for your child's sense of felt security than 20 minutes of structured quality time that happens while you are mentally elsewhere. The third shift is in how you frame separation. Instead of "you'll be fine," which asks your child to agree with an assessment their nervous system does not share, try, "I know this is hard, and I will be back at 3 o'clock." This validates the experience without amplifying it, and it gives the child a concrete, reliable piece of information to hold on to while you are gone. Over time, that reliability is what reshapes the internal working model. The fourth shift is in how you repair after a difficult moment. You will lose your temper, you will miss bids, you will be on your phone when they hop on one foot. This is inevitable, and attachment research is very clear that perfect attunement is not the goal and is not even desirable. Children develop resilience partly through the experience of connection breaking and being repaired. What matters is the repair. Going back to your child after you have snapped and saying something like, "I was short with you earlier, and that wasn't fair. I was stressed about something that had nothing to do with you," does something neurologically real. It shows the child that ruptures are not permanent, that the relationship is sturdy enough to hold difficult moments, and that the adults in their life are safe and honest enough to acknowledge when they got something wrong. This kind of repair is one of the most powerful experiences a child can have. The fifth shift is perhaps the most important and the most difficult. It is noticing your own patterns. Anxious attachment is often transmitted across generations, not through genetics alone but through learned ways of reading and responding to emotion. If you grew up in a home where distress was dismissed or where emotional intensity was frightening or unwelcome, there is a good chance that some of those responses have become automatic in you. When your child cries and you feel a flash of irritation rather than compassion, that is not a character flaw. It is almost certainly a learned response. Noticing it is the beginning of changing it. Let's go back to the grocery store. Same scenario. Your child wanted the crackers. You said not yet. The meltdown begins. Now imagine you know what you know now. You do not immediately try to stop it. You do not look around at the other shoppers. You crouch down, because eye contact at the same level changes the nervous system dynamic. And you say something quiet, not "you're okay." Something like, "I know, that was really disappointing. You really wanted to hold them." You are not rewarding the tantrum. You are acknowledging the feeling underneath it, which tells your child's amygdala that the distress has been registered, that help is present, that the alarm can begin to quiet. It might still take a few minutes. The meltdown might still run its course. But the child in that second scenario is having a different experience. One in which distress is met with presence rather than management, in which the nervous system learns, one small moment at a time, that intense feelings are survivable and that the adults nearby are safe to fall apart around. That is what secure attachment actually looks like from the inside. Not a child who never melts down. A child who melts down and finds, reliably enough, that someone is there when they do. And that, not a perfect parent, not an absence of hard days, not crackers handled perfectly, is what slowly, steadily teaches a nervous system that the world can be trusted. You are already doing more than you know. Understanding the mechanism just means you can do it a little more on purpose.